Mail-order bride faced betrayal and fear. Until a silent cowboy stood beside her against all odds, Amara stepped off the hovering stagecoach, her small crate of belongings clutched tightly in her arms. The desert wind of the Nova Frontier colony whipped at her hair and tore at the edges of her simple dress. The planet was far from Earth, a place she had never seen before, and the sun, an alien orange star, burned hot above her. She had traveled for weeks, leaving everything familiar behind, following a promise that seemed distant and uncertain. The colony spread across the dry plains like a small patchwork of domes and metal buildings. Smoke curled from the chimneys of workshops, and the hum of machinery filled the air. Hover wagons rumbled along the sand paths, carrying settlers and supplies. Amara's heart thumped in her chest. She had arrived to meet her husband, a man named Rylan, who had arranged her journey through the mail-order program for settlers. But as she scanned the colony, she realized no one had come to greet her. Fear began to creep in. She had imagined smiles and welcoming hands, but instead there were only distant stares. Settlers walked past, speaking in low tones, some shaking their heads as if disappointed or wary. Amara felt a sharp pang of loneliness. She had left everything behind, family, friends, and even a small home she loved. And now, standing alone on an alien world, she wondered if she had made a mistake. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. The domes glowed faintly with artificial light, and the desert beyond stretched endlessly, filled with dunes and jagged rocks. The air smelled of hot metal and sand. Strange creatures howled in the distance, their cries echoing across the plains. Amara shivered and clutched her crate tighter. She had never felt so small, so unprotected. As she considered where to go, a sudden movement caught her eye. A figure appeared on the horizon, riding a sleek hover horse. Dust swirled around him, and his silhouette was dark against the fading light. He did not speak. He did not rush to her. He simply watched as he approached, his eyes calm, steady, and unreadable. The man came closer. His hat shaded his face, but Amara could see the sharp lines of a strong jaw and the steady calm of his gaze. He rode with quiet confidence, his presence commanding without a single word. The settlers around them seemed to step aside, leaving a clear path for him. Amara's heart raced. Who was he? Why was he here? When he stopped before her, he simply nodded, then gestured toward a narrow path leading to a hidden canyon. Amara hesitated. She did not know this man. She did not know if she could trust him. But the wind whipped around her, carrying the cries of the desert creatures, and she felt an instinctive urge to follow. Slowly, she nodded and began to walk toward him. The canyon was a short ride away. Shadows stretched across the rocky walls, and the air was cooler, carrying the scent of damp stone. The man led her to a small shack hidden behind boulders. It was simple but sturdy, offering shelter from the desert night. He gestured for her to enter, and she stepped inside, placing her crate down carefully. The interior was sparse. A cot covered with a rough blanket, a small table, and a lantern that cast a soft glow. Amara looked around, uncertain. The man finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "You'll be safe here tonight. The desert is not kind." Amara nodded, swallowing hard. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He did not answer directly. Instead, he simply set down his pack, removed his hat, and ran a hand through his hair. "Call me Kane," he said after a moment. "I know this place. I know its dangers. Trust me, you'll be safe here, for now." Amara wanted to ask more, but something in his calm, quiet presence made her pause. He did not seem threatening, though he was strong and capable. There was a strange kind of reassurance in his silence. She realized for the first time since arriving that maybe she was not completely alone. The first night was difficult. Outside, alien winds whistled through the canyon, and strange creatures roamed the rocks. Amara could hear the hum of machinery from the colony in the distance, but it felt distant and indifferent. She lay on the cot, clutching her small bag of belongings, imagining what might happen if she had to face the desert alone. Kane stayed near the door, his eyes scanning the shadows. He did not speak unless necessary, but his presence was constant. When the wind shook the shack and the strange howls drew closer, she felt a little braver just knowing he was there. Morning came slowly. The orange light of the alien sun filtered through the small window. Amara rose and stepped outside, the canyon quiet now, almost peaceful. Kane was already up, tending to a small fire. He handed her a metal cup of water, and she drank gratefully. "You'll need strength today," he said simply. The colony can be dangerous. Not everyone there is friendly. Amara nodded. She wanted to ask about Rylan, about why he had not come, but she feared the answer. Instead, she decided to watch and learn. Kane moved with a quiet efficiency, pointing out the safe paths through the canyon, how to avoid unstable rocks, and where to watch for desert predators. He did not speak of the settlers, the colony, or the man who had promised her a life here. By midday, Amara had begun to understand the rhythm of life on Nova Frontier. She learned to carry water, watch the horizon for movement, and move silently across the sand. Kane's lessons were practical, quiet, but effective. She was learning to survive, not just to exist. As the sun rose higher, they returned toward the colony. From a hidden ridge, Amara could see the settlement more clearly. Hover wagons moved along dusty paths, domes clustered in small groups, and robotic animals wandered near the edges. People bustled about, but their eyes did not meet hers. Whispers drifted on the wind, some wary, some cruel. Amara felt a pang of fear. She had come seeking a home, but what she found was a place that seemed ready to reject her. She glanced at Kane, who simply nodded toward the path leading down to the colony. His silent confidence gave her a sliver of courage. They reached the edge of the colony, and Amara could see the empty landing area where Rylan should have been. She scanned the crowd, but there was no sign of him. Panic rose in her chest, but she held it back, focusing on the lessons Kane had taught her. She had tools now, knowledge, and surprisingly an ally. Kane stepped closer, his voice low. "We'll find a way," he said simply. "For now, keep quiet, watch, learn, survival comes first." Amara nodded, feeling a spark of determination. She was far from home, but she would not be helpless, she would not be abandoned. The desert was harsh, the colony uncertain, but she had learned the first lesson of life on Nova Frontier. She was not alone, and she would fight to survive. As night fell, Amara stood on a ridge overlooking the colony, the wind tugging at her hair. She could see the faint lights of domes twinkling against the dark desert. Somewhere out there, Rylan waited, or perhaps plotted, but she would face him with the strength she was beginning to find inside herself. Kane's presence was quiet but steady behind her. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. With him by her side, the desert felt a little less empty, the night a little less dangerous, and the path forward just a little clearer. For the first time since her arrival, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. She was a stranger in a harsh world, but she was learning, growing, and surviving. And in that survival, she found courage she never knew she had. The night deepened, and the alien stars shone above. Amara whispered softly to herself, almost like a promise, "I will not be afraid. I will endure, I will survive." Kane watched silently, and the desert listened, carrying their resolve across the endless dunes, a quiet warning to any who might try to harm them. In this strange new world, two unlikely allies had found each other, ready to face whatever dangers awaited on the horizon. Amara woke to the harsh glow of the alien sun streaming through the small window of the canyon shack. The wind outside was calmer than the previous night, carrying the faint hum of the colony in the distance. She stretched, feeling the stiffness from sleeping on the cot, and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had arrived on Nova Frontier only a day before, but already she felt as though the desert had tested every part of her courage. Kane was already up, moving quietly around the shack. He tended a small fire, checking the supplies he had stored in his pack. Without looking up, he handed her a metal cup filled with water. "Drink," he said simply. His voice was calm, steady, the kind that made her feel grounded despite the unknown surrounding her. Amara took the cup, feeling the cool liquid slide down her throat. "Where do we start?" she asked. She thought of the colony, of Rylan, and of the settlers who had seemed so cold and distant. "I don't even know where to go or what to do." Kane's eyes met hers briefly, then returned to the fire. "First, you learn to move in this world. Watch, listen, and survive. The colony has people who may not wish you well. Not everyone can be trusted." Amara nodded. She had learned the desert was dangerous, but now she realized the colony itself was another kind of wilderness, full of schemes, secrets, and unkind hearts. Her husband, the man who had promised her a new life, could be part of the danger. After breakfast, Kane led her out of the canyon, keeping to the shadows. He showed her how to walk quietly over loose sand, how to spot signs of creatures or unstable terrain, and how to move in a way that made her almost invisible against the desert background. Every step she took, she felt more aware of the world around her, of the dangers that could appear in an instant. As they approached the colony, Amara saw the settlement more clearly. The domes clustered in small groups, metallic walls glinting in the sun. Hover wagons moved over the sand paths, carrying settlers who glanced at her and Kane but quickly looked away. It was as if they were trying to ignore her presence, pretending she did not exist. Kane led her to a higher ridge where she could see a part of the colony that many newcomers did not notice. From here, Amara could spot the workshops, the storage areas, and even the landing pads where incoming supplies arrived. She could also see shadows moving, settlers whispering, sometimes with a look of suspicion or disdain. Amara's heart sank. She had hoped to meet Rylan and begin a new life, but instead, she felt as though she had entered a world that was not ready to welcome her. She turned to Kane, unsure of what to do next. "He will come," Kane said quietly, "but you cannot wait. You survive first. You watch, you learn, and you find the truth yourself." Amara followed his advice, keeping to the shadows, learning how to move without drawing attention. Hours passed, and she began to notice small details. The settlers who whispered in corners, the traders who exchanged glances filled with suspicion, and the uneven distribution of supplies that seemed to favor a few while many went hungry. It was during one of these observations that Amara noticed something strange in the quarters where Rylan should have been. A small, flickering light from a hidden slot in the wall caught her attention. Curiosity overcame fear, and she approached, careful to stay unseen. Inside, she found a small data pad flickering with text. Her hands shook as she read. Rylan had not come to meet her because he had plans to abandon her. He had arranged to take her savings and sell off her belongings to a group of traders who would leave her stranded on the far side of the desert. Amara's chest tightened. The man she had trusted, the man who had promised her a life here, was plotting against her. Kane appeared silently behind her, his presence steady and reassuring. He glanced at the data pad and then back at her. "You see," he said simply. Amara nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Why would he do this? I trusted him." Kane did not answer directly. Instead, he handed her a small, folded map and pointed to the safest paths through the desert and the colony. "Trust yourself. You know the truth now. You know the danger. Use it. Move carefully. Learn quickly. Survive." The rest of the day was filled with preparation. Kane taught her to carry a small blaster to aim and fire with precision. He showed her how to ride the hover horse, how to move with speed across the dunes, and how to use the terrain to her advantage. Amara felt a surge of confidence. She was no longer just a helpless bride. She was learning to be a survivor. As night fell, the desert became alive with sounds that made her pulse quicken. The howls of alien predators echoed through the canyon, and the shadows of strange, tall plants moved with the wind. Settlers' lights glimmered faintly in the distance, and somewhere, a hover wagon rumbled over the sand. Amara felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was her world now, and she was beginning to understand it. Suddenly, a shout rang out from the colony. A group of humans, enhanced with cybernetic limbs, were moving through the streets, clearly looking for something or someone. Amara froze. Kane moved silently, signaling her to stay low. The outlaws were fast, their mechanical limbs giving them speed and strength beyond normal humans. They were raiding supplies, breaking into storage areas, and threatening settlers. Amara watched in awe as Kane moved through the shadows, intercepting them with clever tricks and precise timing. He used his blaster only when necessary, relying on agility and cunning to avoid direct confrontation. Amara realized she had a choice. She could hide or she could act. With Kane's guidance, she moved quietly behind the outlaws, learning how to anticipate their movements. She spotted a few vulnerable points where she could help without exposing herself. With careful timing, she triggered small alarms, causing distractions that allowed Kane to gain the upper hand. By the end of the night, the outlaws had retreated, frustrated and confused. The colony was shaken, but no one had been seriously hurt. Amara felt a rush of adrenaline and relief. She had seen Kane in action, and she understood his quiet strength. He was not boastful or loud, but he was capable of protecting her and the colony if needed. As they returned to the canyon shack, Amara's thoughts swirled. She had arrived expecting a husband who would protect her. Instead, she had found a man who did not speak much, but whose actions demonstrated honor and courage. She had also discovered that Rylan could not be trusted and that the desert was full of dangers she had never imagined. Kane handed her a cup of water as they settled inside. "You did well today," he said simply. Amara smiled faintly, a mix of exhaustion and pride. I think I am learning, she admitted. You are, Kane said. His eyes, calm and steady, met hers. But you must keep learning. Tomorrow will bring more challenges. The desert and the colony will test you, and you must be ready. Amara nodded. She felt a growing sense of determination. She had arrived in Nova Frontier as a stranger, scared and unsure. Now, with Kane by her side, she felt the first sparks of confidence and courage. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was beginning to understand that survival was possible, and with it, freedom. The desert night stretched outside the shack, filled with the cries of distant creatures and the whisper of the wind. Amara lay on the cot, her mind alive with plans and possibilities. She thought of Rylan, of the outlaws, and of the harsh world around her. Fear had not vanished, but it had transformed into focus, strategy, and resolve. Kane remained by the door, silent as ever, a quiet sentinel watching over her. Amara realized that she did not need words to understand his loyalty. In a world filled with betrayal and danger, his presence was enough to give her hope. She closed her eyes, letting the lessons of the day sink in. Tomorrow, she would continue to learn, continue to observe, and continue to survive. And slowly, piece by piece, she would prepare herself for the challenges that awaited in the colony and the desert beyond. For the first time since her arrival, Amara felt that she was not completely helpless. She had an ally, she had knowledge, and she had courage. And in the endless night of the Nova Frontier, that was enough to keep her moving forward. The desert sun rose hot and bright over Nova Frontier, turning the sand to gold and the metallic domes of the colony into glittering beacons. Amara stood at the edge of the canyon, looking out toward the settlement. Her hands were steady now, her mind alert. She had survived her first night, faced outlaws, and learned to move silently across the dunes. But she knew the danger was far from over. Ryland's betrayal hung over her like a dark cloud. Kane appeared silently beside her, the shadow of his hat shading his face. He did not speak immediately, letting her gather her thoughts. "He won't stop," he said finally, his voice low and calm. "Ryland will try again." "You must be ready," Amara nodded. Fear was still there, but it was tempered by the lessons she had learned. She could not rely on hope alone, she needed strategy. "What should we do?" she asked. Kane handed her the folded map he had given her the night before. "We gather proof. Show the council the truth. Then you act, but every step must be careful. The colony watches and not everyone is your friend." Amara studied the map. The shadows of buildings, supply storage, and secret pathways through the colony were marked clearly. Kane had taught her how to move quickly without being seen, how to use the terrain to hide, and how to avoid drawing attention. She felt a strange surge of confidence. She was not powerless anymore. As they moved closer to the colony, Amara's nerves tightened. The streets were busy with settlers, but the tension in the air was thick. Whispers followed her steps. Eyes lingered a little too long. She could feel suspicion, fear, and even envy from those around her. She had become the outsider, the stranger, and everyone was waiting to see if she would fail. Kane led her to a quiet alley near Ryland's quarters. "You must go alone from here," he said. "I will watch from the shadows, only act if necessary." Amara's heart pounded. She had learned to trust him, but now it was her choice. She slid through the alley, keeping low, her eyes sharp. The data pad she had discovered yesterday burned in her mind. It held the proof she needed, Ryland's plans to abandon her, steal her belongings, and sell the colony's resources to dangerous traders. She reached Ryland's quarters. The door was unlocked, just as Kane had observed. Inside, the room smelled of dust and metal, and the faint hum of machinery filled the space. Amara moved quickly, checking every corner. She found the hidden slot in the wall where the data pad had been left. Carefully, she extracted it, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Suddenly, a sound made her freeze, a low, mechanical whir. Rylan appeared in the doorway, his expression sharp, his eyes cold. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth but cruel. "I wondered when you would snoop." Amara's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She held up the data pad. "I know everything," she said. "Your plan, your lies, the council will see the truth." Ryland's lips twisted into a sneer. "You think you are brave. You are alone here. No one will believe you. This colony is mine, and you are nothing but a pawn." Amara's hands did not shake. She had learned too much, and she knew she could survive. "I am not nothing," she said firmly. "I am not a pawn, and I am not alone." Rylan stepped forward, but before he could reach her, a faint click echoed in the room. Kane's shadow appeared at the doorway, silent but deadly. His hand rested on his blaster, but his eyes stayed on Rylan. "Back away," he said, voice calm and dangerous. Rylan hesitated, surprised by Kane's sudden appearance. He had underestimated the silent cowboy who had been watching all along. "You," Rylan started, but Kane's sharp movement silenced him. Amara realized then that Kane had not just been her protector, he had been her teacher, her guide, and now her shield. She stepped forward, holding the data pad confidently. "The Council will see everything," she said. "Your lies, your betrayal, and your greed." Rylan's eyes flicked to the door. He knew Kane was ready to act, and he knew that Amara had discovered his secrets. Fear began to creep into his expression, but he masked it with anger. "You think you can stop me?" he spat. "You are just a woman in a world that will crush you." And he is just a cowboy. Neither of you can change what is coming. Amara's mind raced. She knew the outlaws would soon be here, drawn by the chaos, and she could not allow Rylan to escape with his plans intact. She moved quickly, plugging the data pad into a small device Kane had provided, transmitting the files to the Council. A series of blinking lights confirmed the upload. The proof was safe. Rylan's face turned pale as he realized he could no longer manipulate the Council. His threats faltered and the sneer faded into a grimace. Kane stepped closer, his presence solid and unwavering. "Step away," Kane said. "This ends now." Rylan made a sudden move toward Amara, but she was ready. She used the skills Kane had taught her, sidestepping him and pressing a small device that triggered a loud alarm. The sound echoed through the quarters, alerting the settlers and sending Rylan's allies scrambling. Chaos erupted in the streets as the outlaws approached, their cybernetic limbs gleaming under the sun. Kane moved with precision, intercepting them before they could reach Amara. She followed his lead, using her training to dodge and navigate through the corridors of the colony. Every step, every decision was guided by what she had learned in the past days. Together, Amara and Kane outmaneuvered Rylan and the outlaws, leading them into traps they had prepared. Small explosions, clever diversions, and the terrain itself worked in their favor. Rylan cursed and shouted, but it was too late. The Council had received the proof, and settlers began to rally behind Amara, recognizing the truth. By the end of the confrontation, Rylan was cornered. He realized he had lost, and his last attempt at intimidation faltered. Amara stood tall, holding the data pad, while Kane watched silently at her side. The settlers around them cheered, but Amara felt no triumph yet. She knew this was only the beginning. The desert and the colony still held dangers, and trust was something that had to be earned carefully. Kane nodded to her, acknowledging her courage. "You did well," he said. "Not everyone survives this. Not everyone learns this fast. You have strength, Amara." She felt a warmth in her chest. She had come to Nova Frontier expecting a husband to guide her, but she had found something more. She had found courage in herself, and she had found an ally who acted without words but with loyalty and skill. She was no longer just a bride, she was a survivor. The desert wind carried the faint hum of machinery and the distant cries of alien creatures. Amara looked toward the horizon, thinking of the days ahead. There would be more challenges, more threats, but she felt ready. She had learned to watch, to move, to act. She had learned that survival was not just about hiding. It was about courage, strategy, and trust in the right people. As night fell, Amara and Kane returned to the canyon shack. The desert stars shone above, alien constellations twinkling across the sky. Amara settled on the cot, reflecting on what had happened. Rylan was defeated for now, but the colony was still wild and unpredictable. She had proven herself capable, but she knew that the frontier would test her again. Kane remained at the door, silent as ever. His presence was steady, a quiet reassurance in the vast desert. Amara realized that trust did not need words. It could be shown through actions, through consistency, and through shared survival. She had found that in Kane. Amara whispered softly to herself, almost like a vow, "I will not be afraid. I will face what comes. I will survive." The words were simple, but they carried power. They were a promise to herself, a declaration of courage in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. Kane watched silently, his eyes scanning the canyon and the colony beyond. The night carried their determination across the dunes, a warning to anyone who might try to harm them. Amara felt a strange peace settle over her. She had faced betrayal, danger, and fear, and she had endured. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new challenges. But she would face them. With her courage, her skill, and Kane's quiet strength beside her, she felt ready for anything. For the first time since leaving Earth, Amara felt a sense of belonging, not in the colony itself, but in the realization that she could survive and thrive no matter what the desert threw at her. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the promise of more adventures, more dangers, and more opportunities to prove herself. And Amara, the mail-order bride who had arrived fearful and uncertain, lay awake under the alien stars, ready to face whatever came next. The desert dawn painted the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Amara stood at the edge of the canyon, looking out over the colony. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her mind. Rylan had been exposed, his betrayal known to the council, but danger was not gone. His allies, the cybernetic outlaws, still roamed the colony and the surrounding desert, waiting for a chance to reclaim what they had lost. Kane appeared beside her, silent as always. His presence was steady and reassuring. "Today will test you again," he said quietly. "The outlaws will come, we need a plan." Amara nodded. She had grown in confidence, but she understood the stakes. The colony's safety depended on her courage, Kane's skill, and their ability to act together. She felt a calm determination settle over her. Fear was still there, but it was sharpened into focus. They moved through the colony's shadows, checking the weak points and preparing traps. Amara had learned to observe carefully: a loose panel, a narrow alley, a hidden path between domes. Kane guided her silently, pointing out opportunities to use the terrain and the colony's structures to their advantage. By mid-morning, the outlaws arrived, their mechanical limbs glinting under the harsh sun. They moved quickly, their enhanced strength making them dangerous opponents. The settlers watched from behind barriers, fear and hope mixing in their eyes. Amara and Kane positioned themselves strategically, using rooftops, alleys, and elevated platforms to gain an advantage. Rylan appeared with them, desperate and angry. His expression was hard, but his eyes betrayed fear. He had no plan left, and now he relied on sheer numbers and mechanical enhancements to intimidate. Amara steadied herself, remembering all she had learned. She had faced fear before and survived. She had confronted betrayal, and she had discovered strength within herself. Now she would use that strength to protect the colony. The first clash was sudden. Outlaws charged forward, weapons raised. Kane moved like a shadow, striking quickly and retreating before the enemy could respond. Amara followed his lead, her blaster steady, her movements precise. She ducked behind barrels, rolled across sand-covered floors, and fired only when necessary. Each shot was calculated, each step measured. The outlaws were strong, but Amara and Kane had something they did not: knowledge of the terrain, strategy, and courage. Amara led a small group of settlers through hidden paths, drawing out attackers and isolating them from their main group. Kane used the hover horses to flank and distract, appearing in multiple locations almost as if he could be in more than one place at once. Rylan realized quickly that his advantage was slipping. He tried to shout orders, but his men were disoriented, caught in traps and misdirection. Amara pressed forward, moving with a confidence she had never known before. Every action she took was deliberate, showing her growing skill and bravery. One of the cybernetic outlaws lunged at her, aiming to strike, but Amara anticipated the movement. She sidestepped, using a low blast to disable the attacker's mechanical arm without causing permanent harm. Kane was already there, securing the rest of the group. Amara felt a rush of adrenaline, realizing how far she had come. She was no longer helpless. She was a fighter capable of protecting herself and others. Rylan's desperation grew. He moved to confront Amara directly, pointing a blaster at her. "You cannot stop me," he shouted, but Amara stood her ground. She had no fear now, only determination. She fired a precise shot, disabling his weapon, and he fell to the ground, stunned. Kane moved quickly, stepping between Rylan and Amara. "It ends now," he said calmly. His hand rested on Rylan, keeping him in check. The outlaws, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat. Amara and Kane pursued, using the traps and obstacles they had set to cut off escape routes. By the afternoon, the last of the outlaws had been captured or driven away. The colony was quiet once more, the air filled with relief and cautious celebration. Amara stood in the center of the settlement, her chest heaving from exertion, her mind still alert. She had survived the battle, and the colony had seen her courage firsthand. The council gathered, acknowledging the proof of Ryland's betrayal and the actions of Amara and Cain. Settlers who had doubted her now looked at her with respect. Amara felt a quiet pride. She had arrived as a stranger, vulnerable and unsure, and she had faced the colony's greatest threats with courage and skill. Cain stayed silent beside her, as always. He had done more than protect her. He had taught her, guided her, and stood by her side without a single complaint or boast. Amara realized that his silence was not emptiness but strength, a steadfast presence that allowed her to grow and act confidently. Ryland was removed from the colony, his plans exposed and foiled. The settlers began to rebuild, working together to restore order and security. Amara walked among them, helping where she could, her confidence growing with each task. She had learned that survival required action, courage, and trust in the right people. As evening fell, Amara returned to the canyon shack with Cain. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. The stars of Nova Frontier began to shine, alien constellations twinkling above. Amara sat on the cot, reflecting on all that had happened. "I never imagined I could survive this," she said softly, looking at Cain. "You can," he replied simply. "You had the strength all along. I just helped you see it." Amara smiled faintly. She had faced betrayal, danger, and fear. She had learned to fight, to think strategically, and to trust herself. And she had found an ally in Cain, a silent, steady companion who had proven that true strength did not need words. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the sounds of distant machinery, the faint cries of alien creatures, and the calm of the night. Amara felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had arrived as a mail-order bride, uncertain and afraid, but she would remain as someone who had faced the harsh frontier and emerged stronger. Cain prepared a small fire, and they sat together in silence. There was no need for words. The bond between them had grown through action and trust. Amara realized that in the harshness of the desert, she had found something rare: courage, skill, and a companion who would stand beside her no matter what. The colony would continue to face challenges, and the desert would remain unpredictable, but Amara knew she was ready. She had learned to survive, to protect, and to act with determination. And as she looked at Cain, she knew that together they could face whatever came next. The night deepened, and Amara lay down on the cot, staring at the alien stars. She felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had faced her fears, exposed the betrayal, and helped save the colony. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. She had found her courage, her strength, and a sense of purpose. Cain remained at the door, silent and watchful, a guardian of the desert and the settlement. Amara whispered softly to herself, a vow carried on the wind: "I will survive. I will face what comes. I will protect what I care about." The desert listened. The canyon held their determination. And under the alien stars, Amara, the mail-order bride who had arrived with fear in her heart, found a new life filled with courage, strength, and hope. She had arrived alone, but she would no longer be helpless. She had learned to stand, to fight, and to endure. And with Cain by her side, she knew she could face whatever dangers the frontier, the colony, or the unknown desert might bring. Nova Frontier was no longer a place of fear for Amara. It was a place of survival, growth, and new beginnings. And as the wind whispered across the dunes, she felt ready to embrace whatever adventures awaited, knowing she had the courage to face them.